Do not adjust your television sets. No, it is not 2024. Zach Hyman, unfortunately, will not be here. But the Oilers and the Panthers, round two. Let's get to work.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers and Locked On Panthers. I am Nick Zararis, the host of Locked On Oilers. That is Armando Velez, the host of Locked On Panthers. We want to thank everyone that is making our shows their first listen of the day. Both Locked On Oilers and Locked On Panthers are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we've got your team covered every day. And today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where right now, new FanDuel customers can get $200 in bonus bets if their first $5 bet wins. Head on over to fanduel.com to learn more. Armando, my friend, it's a pleasure to be here. It's a privilege to be here. Let's get to the nitty gritty. We've got a two-parter for the good folks out there. Today, we're going to be more meta storylines, questions. Tomorrow will be a little more player strategy, X's and O's centric. So we're going to go back and forth with our questions for each other about each other's team. The first question I have for you: at this point, does it feel like this is the expectation that going forward, as long as the Panthers have this core, they are supposed to be Stanley Cup contenders every year?
Yeah, it really truly does feel that way, and you could just see it just by the way they handled Game 5, and just, okay, take a picture with the trophy, go right back to the locker room, and even Matthew Tkachuk's to the media after, and just discussing, hey, it's business like. That's the way they describe it. And even as a person who's been watching the Panthers for a decade and a half, I mean, going at least being part of the end of the 12-year playoff drought, and then seeing the ups and downs with not making the postseason, not winning around, and then going from ending the 26-year drought to now 3 years of being in the Stanley Cup, you expect it. And it wasn't as much of a celebration making the Stanley Cup final as it was in previous years. It's like, okay, this truly, they really truly are taking advantage of this window. So I want to flip it back over to you, because if I'm being honest, I was not expecting a Stanley Cup Final rematch based on how the Edmonton Oilers went into the postseason going with an injury, especially to their back end in Matthias Ekholm, who came back in Game 5 against Dallas. But just the surprise, how surprising was it for you, the fact that they got back to this point?
So National Lampoons is kind of out of the lexicon. That's an older person movie, but I would not have been as surprised if I woke up with my face sewn to the carpet than I was that the fact that the Oilers are here. Because as you alluded to, going into the playoffs, March, April, they were a bad hockey team. They could not find ways to win. They were dealing with a litany of injuries: Zach Hyman, McDavid, Draisaitl. You mentioned Ekholm, Jake Wallman, Trent Frederick. They had a laundry list of injuries. We're playing, a spring training B team lineup for most of April. And those last 3 games of the regular season, they still had a chance at home ice if they won all 3 of their games, and the Kings lost 2 of those 3. And they didn't dress a full lineup for the game against the Kings on the Monday, the game where Nurse cross-checked Byfield, and it turned into that debacle where a whole bunch of people got ejected. And even after beating the Kings, I was still kind of bearish, didn't feel particularly good playing against Vegas. I frankly thought Vegas was the best team in the West, and the Oilers over the last 2 rounds have evolved into a really dangerous group that has pleasantly surprised me in the best way possible. It's not something I expected, frankly. I didn't think they had this in them. And especially you think about where the goaltending was a month ago when the playoffs started, where the first 2 games, Skinner got yanked, and you go to Pickard, who wins 6 in a row, and Pickard gets hurt, and you lose the game where Skinner gives up the goal with 0.4 of a second left. And how does he respond? And they play their best 2 games of the playoffs. It's been a real whirlwind in the best way possible. And similarly to you, I know the Panthers down the backstretch of the regular season, no Matthew Tkachuk, dealt with the injury from 4 Nations. They added Brad Marchand, who wasn't fully healthy when they acquired him. Seth Jones, they added a little bit ahead of the deadline. What would you say has made the Panthers more dangerous this year? Because last year they were good. This year it kind of feels like they're reveling in the fact they're beating the crap out of these teams along the way. Like there's a little bit of sadism in the fact they're enjoying mangling teams. Like they bullied Carolina for 5 games.
Yeah, and even going back to the regular season, there were times where there was lulls in the schedule, and then when you saw on the schedule that it was teams that they faced in the postseason the last 2-3 years, that's when you would see the Panthers show up for the most part. And their record somewhere around the lines of like 13-4-1 in those games this season. So I mean, they show up even in the regular season games when necessary. So it doesn't take a lot to get this team going. And it's crazy to think that after April 1st, especially, they lost a heartbreaker where against the Montreal Canadiens, where they were leading going with a minute left in regulation, then they lose in overtime. That was basically the nail in the coffin, at least for the regular season, on just, okay, the fact that they're not going to be able to win the division. And then after a second end of a back-to-back where the front end against Ottawa, they put a whole bunch of shots on Anton Forsberg, and then they still get shut out. The Palmares puts basically, like you said, a spring training squad in the case of the Panthers, in this case, on April 6th against the Detroit Red Wings, where you look at this, it's all about pace, keeping up with the pace, keeping fresh, going into the postseason. There are some flashes towards the end of the regular season, racking up some wins, but really what it came down to was the Panthers getting healthy at the right time. Obviously, Matthew Tkachuk comes back right in game 1 and scores 2 goals right there two of them on the power play, scoring 3 of them. All 3 of his power play goals in the playoffs have all came in one series against the Tampa Bay Lightning. But just the fact that you even had Nate Schmidt getting off to that great start, which is like, oh man, when the Panthers started winning those 2 games on the road in Tampa Bay, which a lot of people were saying, whoever wins this series will represent the Eastern Conference in the Stanley Cup Final. I was one of those many people who were saying that. So I'm just thinking, okay, this team has what it takes. And also a little bit of a scare there in that second round series against the Leafs, multiple breakaway opportunities, and then the turning point of the playoffs as of right now was that Brad Marchand overtime winner in game 3. But it's hey, this is the expectation once again. But I want one more question before we transition. One thing that I've been really impressed with the Oilers this year and just how they've been able to get to this point. People talk about Stuart Skinner. People talk about depth scoring. But I want to go back to the coach. You have a full year under your belt now compared to last season where you come within the first 2 months of the season. But how impressed are you by what Chris Knobloch has done for pushing the right buttons to get to this point?
So at first you say, guys, lucky. You keep making the right decision over and over again, and whether it's the regular season or the playoffs, and you need a sample size before you start to determine if like they have a sixth sense and they're very good at this. And right now, I am inclined to say Knobloch just has a great feel for the group. I mean, 2 years in a row, navigating the Skinner struggles, getting quality hockey out of Pickard, and then being able to go back to Skinner. The lineup management, when to add certain guys, when to pull certain guys, inserting and finding line combinations that aren't the most conventional. You know, you wouldn't draw up playing Vasily Podkolzin and Kasperi Kapanen with Leon Draisaitl if you were to have your way. You wouldn't play Connor Brown with Connor McDavid all that often, but Chris Knobloch has continuously found the right way. And I think it mostly comes from his overall philosophy of being a little bit more of a defense-oriented coach and really liking certain combinations to really implement that. He would really loves that Connor Brown, Adam Henrique, and then either Matthias Janmark or Trent Frederick third line. And we'll see how the forwards lines shake out. I know there's a whole lot to get to on tomorrow's show where we'll really dive into that because these are 2 really deep teams, the 2 best 5-on-5 goal-scoring teams by forwards in these entire playoffs. So we are going to take our first break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers and Panthers. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about the bigger picture, what this means for the Southern Hockey Project, what this means for hockey in Canada, and a whole lot more. So be sure to stick around. The NBA and NHL playoffs are in full swing, and every single night delivers highlight-worthy performances. Major momentum shifts and can't miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. And FanDuel makes it so easy to stay in the game before tip-off and puck drop and after the game starts. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. If you think Oklahoma City is going to make mincemeat of the Pacers, you know what you need to do with Shea, points, rebounds, assists. If you're more inclined, like Armando and I might be, to be interested in the Oilers-Panthers series, there's star power everywhere. McDavid, Draisaitl, Kachuk, Barkov, dare I say Brad Marchand. There are so many opportunities, and you can check FanDuel for updated odds after games start. And if you're new to FanDuel, there's never been a better time to sign up. Head on over to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If that bet wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out with Armando and I on this part 1 edition of our Stanley Cup Final preview for the Locked On Podcast Network. And I have been a staunch defender of what I would call the Southern Hockey Project. And as much as Gary Bettman has gotten flack for especially the Arizona franchise management over this window, I don't think you can look at the contemporary NHL and not say it's been a resounding success. I mean, you go post-2005 lockout, you have a Hurricane Stanley Cup. The Stars won the Stanley Cup prior to that lockout, but had been in the Stanley Cup a number of times. The St. Louis Blues have won a Stanley Cup. The Ducks won a Stanley Cup in there. And then, of course, the 2 Florida teams have largely defined the last 5 to 10 years in this league. And the first part of my question, based on that foreshadowing there, what has watching this evolution meant as somebody who's cared long before you were doing a show? What is watching the Panthers become one of the NHL's marquee franchises just meant to you?
Don't forget to add the LA Kings there.
Of course.
It's 2000s, 2010. So big part of the Southern hockey being successful. But yeah, it's a big turnaround. You think that the Panthers were giving tickets for free at one point because they couldn't fill the barn, and now tickets for game 3 are going up to, before fees, they're looking at something around like $700. I'm just so mind blown by that, to think that that's the price of admission to get in for the Panthers. But bigger picture for the Panthers, and just what's at stake for them is to just be a part of that history for Florida being the parts of the Tampa Bays, Chicago's, LA, Pittsburgh in this. I'm just talking about this century, and being part of the truly respected teams in the league. I mean, the conversation is over when it comes to the fact that they're a laughingstock, win or lose. When it comes to this series, the fact that they got a cup to their name is the fact that, okay, we can look back and say the ownership dedicated some money to it. The debts have been cleared after they won the Stanley Cup last year. They paid off all the remaining debt, and now they're going to repurpose that money to the arena, the surrounding area, which is so great when you think of it. And also the fact that youth hockey has also grown. Registration is up in the area, and that's really what it does whenever you have a franchise winning like the Florida Panthers. They're top 12 in attendance. They sold out both upper and lower bowls for the first time coming into this year. So it's so crazy, the headlines going into it, because last year we were discussing before game 7, history will be made one way or the other. First championship or biggest choke since the 1940s. And the Panthers were thankfully able to get that done. And honestly, it's been a big momentum changer, especially the fact that the other 3 teams in the South Florida sports market are kind of down right now. The Dolphins and the Heat are in a state of mediocrity, and because baseball doesn't have a salary cap, the Marlins are there's no incentives to spend for them.
Yeah. It's really interesting in that respect. And you alluded to it. Something that I've found very interesting is that when Florida changed ownership, one of the first things they did was non-salary cap spending, building out your support staff, building out a more robust front office. And that's one of the few like direct indicators, and the Oilers do a good job of this too, of just your owner cares because he's willing to spend as much as he possibly can on stuff where there's not cap spending. You know, you can have 1,000 assistant coaches, you can have a bunch of front office staff, and that's a really direct way your owner can tell the organization and the guys on the team, what do you need to be successful? We're going to do it. And the Panthers are very much in that conversation now with some of the original 6 teams like the Rangers, the Leafs. I would say the Oilers, the Canucks, the teams where they will spend as much as it takes to get where they want to be.
Yeah, and add the Anaheim Ducks to that. They're about to spend to the cap. They're putting $1 billion in renovations into their arena coming up. So, and they're going to be in on some guys, maybe a Jonathan Toews, maybe a Mitch Marner. But yeah, the Panthers are up there. I mean, Vinny Viola is also one of those people who has a horse usually in every Kentucky Derby as well. So it's not just the hockey that he's investing in. So it just goes to show that when you have some dedication to that part of the franchise outside of the salary cap, like you said, that it convinces fans to just want to buy into something that is like, hey, you're going to respect the fans. You're going to say, hey, we mean business when it comes to wanting to put a winner out here. And it's funny because when you look at the Oilers, to flip it over to you, I mean, spending, you know, getting Leon's extension out of the way before the season started, we assume that it's going to be the same thing of McDavid. I mean, listen, for as long as you put those two together, they are going to be able to extend those guys, regardless of what happens in this final. There's all that speculation of McDavid leaving. I'm not buying it. So the fact that they're getting to these 2 Stanley Cup Finals and the fact that they are building a team around them, I mean, that's got to really be satisfying for Oilers Nation.
It's funny you say that because I kind of wrote that down here in my notes when I was putting together the outline for the show today. Just a validation of the misery, because you got to remember the Oilers went like 13 years between playoff appearances when they lost to Carolina, and then the first time they made it with McDavid and they lost in the second round of the Ducks. Then they missed the playoffs 3 years in a row. They come back, they beat the Kings, they lose in the second round, they go to the conference final, lose there. They go to the Cup final last year, lose there, and then they're back in the Cup final this year. It's a long, winding road, and I always find those narratives to be the most compelling in sports is how did you get here and why did you get here? You think about the Oilers picking first overall 4 years in a row, picking Draisaitl third overall, and they still couldn't win. And they still couldn't find the right mix of guys around that. A lot of forays into free agency that didn't turn out well. A lot of trades that didn't turn out well. And I'm not going to say they stumbled into being a good team. You know, the Ekholm trade and Zach Hyman free agent signings are largely why they've been able to make that jump from nice regular season team to consistently dangerous playoff team. And this year in particular, it's been a different level of professionalism because the defense has been worlds better. Because last year, every time the puck was in the Oilers' end, sitting on your hands, biting your nails, looking away, looking through your fingers because it was an adventure. Whether it was Nurse, it was CC, it was Desharnais, and this year it's been clinical. Sure, Dallas, Vegas had the puck a lot more in their series, but they weren't creating dangerous offense. They weren't giving up a whole lot off of the rush. And when you have that full, and that's one of the things I always say is the way you tell a team is fully bought in is defense and transition, because those are about effort. You know, if the other team's better than you, there's only so much you can do about that. But if you get outworked, you get out-tried, that's on you. That's a moral failing. And the last thing I wanted to ask before we take our second and final break, what do you make of the conjecture around the state income tax that's bubbling over the last few weeks? Because I think I understand where it's coming from, but at the same time, the Oilers have made 2 straight Stanley Cup Finals, and Alberta has a pretty high marginal tax rate on top of Providence taxes. So when you, I think it's a bit misguided, and I think it's a bit simple. I mean, were people talking about this when the Lightning and Panthers weren't good teams? No, but we got to make excuses for the Leafs, the Rangers, and the teams that do pay high state taxes.
Yeah, it's funny because 16 of the last 20 Stanley Cup champions are from teams that have state income tax for that. So that's the stat that I always try to provide when it comes to it. So I mean, the bill's going to come due for the Panthers come this summer. So the excuses are going to run out after this year due to the fact that they have to try to keep Bennett and Ekblad under market value more than likely if they want to keep both of them. So, hey, the salary cap in itself is designed to create the parity. It's just whenever you have a flat cap, that's where those teams like Canada, who's had the Canadian teams who've had longer shutdowns, are kind of in a little bit of a squeeze for when it comes to how they manage things. And for the Panthers here, it's a little bit of something that has just been exploited over this little bit of time. Now things are starting to catch up a little bit here. So I think that it's gonna eventually. It's a little bit of a frame of a window between these two teams, but it's gonna eventually circle back to it not being a conversation anymore. So I believe this is only temporary because NBA has a salary cap, NFL has a salary cap, so and the Dolphins and the Heat haven't figured it out in a while as far as winning anything.
You raise a very fair point there as far as the other sports and the expectations. It's largely because hockey just doesn't make as much money, and that's why the players don't make as much money. But we're going to take our second final break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about what this series means for the players, the coaches, and this exact moment in NHL history. Be right back. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out with Armando and I on this crossover edition of Locked On Oilers and Locked On Panthers. So I wanted to start, and this might surprise you, I wanted to start this conversation talking about Sergei Bobrovsky, because I largely feel that he, especially during his time in Columbus, where he was always cast as the great goalie on the bad team, has to elevate, has to carry them. And he's on such a good team now where he only really needs to break that out, once or twice a series, the great Bob game. And you add a second cup to the two Vezinas, and he's right there in terms of the resume with a Vasilevsky. He's probably the best goalie after Vasilevsky of the last 15 years. You could put Hellebuck in there, but Hellebuck hasn't had the regular season success so much. So first part, what do you think it means as far as where we consider Bob in the conversation? And then number two, what does it mean to you that a guy who picked the Panthers is like, I want to spend the rest of my prime here as a free agent? What does that mean to you as a fan and someone who covers the team, that someone was willing to take a chance on your team and they've been able to find another level to their game and really, frankly, elevate their legacy?
This is the part where you thank Dale Talon for that contract. He was the one who signed Bobrovsky to that deal. And hey, it comes to the fact that, hey, the Columbus Blue Jackets bought a lot during the trade deadline in Sergei Bobrovsky's final year before that upset in the playoffs against the Lightning, and they were just not going to be able to pay that top dollar and say, okay, 7 years, 70 million for Bobrovsky. I remember the conversation. That's high for a goalie, and the fact that his first 2 years weren't even the best here. And obviously the defense wasn't where it was. The coaching wasn't where it was. But you just put something, a good system around him and blue liners that will at least protect shots and at least not screen him. And the fact that Bob doesn't give up goals through down low, that's really important when it comes to just how he's able to help the Panthers win night in and night out. And I mean, even if he didn't win the cup last year, I said that the 2023 run, because that's when Bob was facing a way more amount of shots. That was the run where I said Hall of Famer for Bob.
And as we continue the conversation as far as Bob, the rest of the Panthers, the other one I find very interesting here is, number one, that Brad Marchand wanted to go to the Panthers. Number two, that he has fit so well with the Panthers. Him and Luosterainen have arguably been the Panthers' best line at 5-on-5 for the entirety of the playoffs. What is that? I don't want to say what does that mean, because that's largely been the recurring question I've asked, but I think that's like validation and proof that the Panthers are a serious franchise, that someone like Marchand would want to go there. And the fact that everybody they bring in seems to buy in so much into how they need to play, what they need to do to be successful as a Panther, I find it remarkable how well. I mean, 2 years in a row. I mean, Tarasenko last year fit perfectly for what they wanted him to do. And I think it's a real testament to what Paul Maurice has been able to get out of that group, that no matter who you are, they've rotated guys in and out that bottom half of the lineup very well. I know he said that he has something like 18 guys he feels good about playing 12 spots. I think it's a real validation of where the Panthers are at, and it really sets the table nicely for a series very similarly where the Oilers have largely found a group that kind of buys into what they need to do.
Yeah, and that, as far as being a plus players, they're to the top there when it comes to their plus minus. I mean, the elimination games against the Leafs and against the Lightning, that's where they showed out the most. And you mentioned it with Vladimir Tarasenko. There's been a different winger on their line the last 3 playoff runs. Sam Reinhart was on Lundell's wing in the 2023 run, and that's the line that really carried the Panthers over, especially in that second round series against Toronto when they won in 5 in that year. So that was a big impact. I mean, Lundell has played the most playoff games from the 2020 draft class. Hard to believe that he was a 12th overall pick, sliding that far, and he's played the most games by a country mile. And the fact that adding a veteran like Brad Marchand, it also helps that Lundell played pro hockey in Finland for a whole year right before coming over for HIFK. So that he was ready for pro hockey right before he came here. And obviously adding Marchand to the mix, a seasoned veteran, over 150 playoff games, that's just a big luxury for the Panthers. I mean, and you mentioned guys who wanted to come here. I mean, it even goes back all the way to Joe Thornton, 1-year contract after he said during the Leafs Habs series in 2021, there was one series that I'm watching outside of mine, and it was Tampa Bay, Florida, and that convinced him to want to go when a legend like that also wants to come there. And also the fact that even before the coaching change, Patrick Hornquist had to waive his no trade clause in order to come to Florida, and he changed his mind of wanting to come over to Florida. So and that was Zito's very first trade as general manager of the Panthers.
It sets a nice storyline up in that respect, that the Oilers largely have done something similar. Adam Henry, Connor Brown, Corey Perry, Evander Kane, where I don't want to say misfits. You could say the same thing about Jake Wallman, Troy Stetcher, where they found guys who, underutilized in different places. In the cases of Kane and Perry, off the ice stuff made them available for a lot less than they're worth on the open market. And it's created a really strong group that really feels like it's prepared. And I do think last year mattered immensely. I know the Oilers had been to a couple conference finals with McDavid and Draisaitl before last year, but last year was the first time it all really came together. And I think you would say a similar thing as far as the Panthers going to the Cup final and losing, that you need those experiences to lose those tough games, to have those heartbreakers, because that makes you better. It changes you as a person to get that close and not win. And I think you really see it this year in the playoffs, the way the Panthers and the Oilers have basically since the middle of the second round been unequivocally the 2 best teams.
Yeah, and you think about the Oilers on there and the fact that 2 losses since the Kings series, and one of them was off a strange bounce off of Draisaitl's stick from Riley Smith, and then 3 power play goals in a span of 5 minutes, and that has been the only blips in the Edmonton Oilers in the last 2 rounds. And also think about this. There are 10 new faces on the Panthers coming into this playoff run versus 8 for the Oilers here. You also think about the makeover of a little bit of a makeover of the 4th line. I mean, I know Jeff Skinner has only played 2 games in the postseason, but how impactful was his goal in Game 5 against the Dallas Stars? Trent Frederick coming from the Boston Bruins as a 4th line grinder type of guy. That's huge whenever it comes to just trying to, whenever we discuss top lines, usually neutralize each other, but then trying to get those bottom six guys to get going as well. Victor Arvidsson is also seasoned as well. And I mean, the fact that Edmonton was able to get Jake Wallman after the San Jose Sharks basically got him for nothing and then getting a first round pick out of that, it's outstanding, the type of work. I know Steve Yzerman had to pay Seider and Raymond, so that he had no leverage there, but how great Mike Greer did it again when it comes to just his outstanding trades. And hey, it's working out for the Oilers. And the fact that Wallman's on the third pair, I mean, up and down, it's really truly helping the defense. And I mean, John Klingberg, his running mate there, the hip resurfacing surgery, that's not an easy one to come back from. And to think that he gambled on himself when he was with Dallas to get a contract and really never got that, this is the second best thing for him, trying to get a Stanley Cup.
It's going to set up a fascinating series. Armando and I have so much more to talk about. We could do like 5 episodes of this just setting the table, but we will be back tomorrow to talk a little bit more in depth about matchups, X's and O's. We'll pick the series, which I know everybody's very curious who the Oilers guy and the Panthers guy is going to pick in a best of 7 series, but you got to check out tomorrow's show to find out. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you're on Apple or Spotify, leave a 5-star review, please. Helps both shows. If you're over on YouTube, subscribe, like, comment on the video. What narrative storyline compels you most? Armando and I are going to see you guys tomorrow.